Hello, and welcome to the January 23rd edition of the SIG Cluster Lifecycle Kubernetes SIG meeting. Today, we're going to start out, Tim has the first agenda item, talking about shifting defaults in kubeadm.
So I burned through some of the PR backlog, and I was looking at a bunch of changes that were both in flight, as well as some other changes that were happening on the SIG API machinery front. One of the questions I had with regards to this was that we had enabled a bunch of initializer code, and that's kind of it's still alpha, and I think it's meant to be deprecated in favor of mutating webhooks. And we have not provided, I know we have it enabled now, so that's just kind of a PSA that stuff exists now. There was a second set of PRs with regards to the one that's linked there. Hold on one second, it's loading for me. Yeah, there was refactoring on command line arguments. And what has a tendency to happen, I don't know how exactly Lucas was tracking this type of stuff, but as the API server, API machinery changes its args, it will directly impact our deployment. And I just kind of lucked out that I was able to see some of this stuff fly by. But the order of argument changes had not percolated through kubeadm when the PRs had come in. So I don't know exactly how we track and manage some of this stuff over time. Or I don't know how he was doing it, other than he was like in all the SIG meetings. Does anyone have any thoughts here?
So this looks like it's a flag for, I'm just reading the PR right now, for admission controllers on the API server?
Yes. And it's just a minor switch, but like there's a bunch of little minor things that add up to be a bunch of flag changes, and you're gonna have to go through a flag day, right? So we'd rather have those changes early and enabled and updated, so that way we don't have to like have a special day near the end of release cycle where everything's broken.
Well, everything shouldn't break, right? Because I think the contract with flags is you can't just delete a flag. You have to deprecate it first, give fair warning, add it to the release notes. So technically, we should be able to use old flags up through a release, see the changes in the release notes, and catch it on the next release and not actually break a new one. I don't know how tightly people are holding to that contract, though.
That should be the contract, so I'm cool with that if that's the policy we want to go forwards with. We just have to make sure we do our due diligence on the release cycle.
But on admission controllers, order also matters, right? Even if the flag doesn't go away, the order still matters.
Yes, it did. And there were PRs around this. So like before we were actually had some admission controllers enabled, but we didn't have all the bits properly turned off, like initializers. So, and we ripped those out because it was considered alpha, right? And we've replaced it with the ordering of enabling mutating webhooks, and eventually having that as the means for, future mutating webhooks, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, and I think, and your point there, Craig, is also right, that it's, even if, for flags in particular, if we have sort of a backstop because they're supposed to promise compatibility, there are also sort of behavioral changes that people in other SIGs are saying, we want to do X during this next release, and then they, make that change in one place, and it doesn't, typically always percolate out to all the tools, right? We've had this problem in the past with, keeping COPS up to date with different admission controllers, keeping GKE up to date, keeping, the kube up stuff up to date. Like someone will change stuff in one place to get their test to pass, and people won't necessarily notice that it needs to be changed in all of these other places for consistency. And that is actually one reason we were trying to push kubeadm, is if we could make that the one place that people change it and everybody gets that consistency for free, that would be great. And if not, people can at least see what kubeadm is doing and follow that. So I think maybe part of this is we should try to start maybe inching our way towards having kubeadm be part of the PR blocker workflow, so that people are forced to change it to make their PRs pass and merge. I
thought it already was.
I don't know if it's in the pull request set. It's in, I think, the post submit set. And some of these changes might actually not break us if they're not actually using kubeadm to run their EDs either, right?
Could we have as an action item for this meeting someone to take that on to make that a blocking PR job? Because I think we're at the stage where it should be. I mean, to be honest, I'd rather remove cops as a blocking PR job after what happened yesterday and enable kubeadm because it's a more commonly used across provider resource.
Well, I would also take that one step further, as we talked about, Tim, is maybe even make it the packages themselves, because the packages always lag, and there is code in the packages that could affect how someone deploys Kubernetes.
So that part has partially been fixed, I think. I'd have to take a look at the PR job with the Ubuntu Bazel stuff. But we need a person to take ownership of blocking PR work. And I know Jacob had done a lot of that work before, but we're like a rotating volunteer army. And as I burn through the backlog, this is definitely one of the big flailings I see, is that in order for us to get coverage on some of these changes, we are going to need somebody to own the test infra jiggery and make sure it's consistent. I don't want to throw some of our resources on landmines, but I know Chuck is here and I might task him with a dirty task to get him up to speed on some of this stuff. But ideally, I would like some of the community to step up here too, right? So that was probably the biggest API stuff that I had noticed. There's a bunch of other PRs I was going to walk through too, and I was also going to talk about possibly using tomorrow as a kind of a flag day to go through the backlog, because I can't apply some of the changes I want to all the issues and make sure we have a curated backlog without kind of buy-in from some of the people who are going to be executing on it. So I was thinking tomorrow might be a good day to just do a Festivus on some of the issues that are there and try to get like a sane 110 list pruned down, because there's a bunch of stuff in the 110 milestone in the kubeadm repo that is not really, I don't think can be accomplished. They're kind of punting off. So I'd like to trim it down and have it priority sorted for what we can actually accomplish in 110 and make sure that aligns with our GA doc. I don't know if that jives with other people for tomorrow though.
That sounds great to me. I think, as you said, one of the struggles that we sort of keep coming back to is sort of people rotating in and out and not having sort of consistent sort of level of effort being applied across the project, which makes it really difficult to figure out how far we're going to be able to get in the next milestone. But if we can have the things sort of priority sorted and make sure that the people that are working on things are working at the top of the list instead of just on something out of this huge milestone list, then I think that will also be more effective.
Yeah, that's the way I operate, and other folks can attest to this. Is I'm a big fan of priority sorted lists. So I make lists for lists, just because it takes ambiguity out of the picture, right? And that way anyone can jump in at any moment in time and see the backlog. So that was kind of my proposal for tomorrow. And for today, some of the issues that I went through, that some of the PRs that have been merged, some of the issues that I've gone through actually need more clarification from this group. So I kind of wanted to talk about some of those too.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I guess, I don't know how, it looks like we have a relatively short agenda today. So one option would be we could do some of that today, or we could just cut this meeting short and let people know to come tomorrow if they're maybe not in this meeting. But there's not a whole lot left on the agenda today.
I think these ones actually require clarification. So it doesn't hurt to have a broader group for some of them. The first one is like we added args to kubeadm to supply a pass-through until we actually have like component config in place. And the comment that Lucas had made and Ilya had also made was that we kind of first classed them as high-level arguments, and maybe we should have them as a gate because they're only a temporary fix. And I wanted to get feedback from folks to, and it says, let's discuss this. Feedback from folks to see what their thoughts are.
Yeah, I think especially if we're trying to push kubeadm to be GA, I think Lucas's point is relevant there, that if we add a whole bunch of top-level flags, we're kind of committing to supporting those for quite some time.
And the flags are basically pass-throughs for arguments to the server. And as we get component config, and they were born out of frustration and legitimate frustration too.
Are the pass-throughs they're there in the config file version of kubeadmin, right?
Yes.
They're not there in the command line version?
Exactly. So they already existed in the config file, and these pass-throughs are basically to first class them as arguments through the main line. And Ilya, I know you had commented on this. Do you have comments that you wanted to make here?
Not much outside of what I said on ticket. Yeah, so it does seem like the kind of flag that we initially avoided putting through to top-level commands, and I've tried to discuss that with the author and tried to invite them to this call. I don't know if they actually joined. Yeah, essentially, thanks for scrolling down. Yeah, doesn't seem appropriate for the top-level commands. Maybe in the phases commands, it'd be okay to add these because phases is still up alpha.
I don't know if phases make sense or whether or not they're feature-gated flags. I think what we'll do after this meeting is I will open up an issue and possibly modify the existing PR and point to it too.
That would make sense, yeah. So we didn't know we have feature-gated flags. If we do that totally makes sense to add as a temporary feature.
Yeah, I think it looks like both Lucas and maybe Ilya also commented on the pull request to invite the person to the SIG for sort of more higher bandwidth in-person discussion, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think that's relatively common in other SIGs also, like as we've interacted with them. If you send them something that's sort of not clear cut and something they definitely want to accept, they tell you, please show up at our SIG meeting and let's talk about it. And I think it's fine if we sort of hold that same line where if somebody wants to send us code, that's great. We love to take code, but we're not just going to take any code. And if it's somewhat controversial, we should definitely talk about it, right? So I think that we should definitely just gate this PR on being able to have that in-person discussion.
Yes, I agree. I think what happened here is it was LGTM by others first, and I think they were looking for approval, and then there was the conversation afterwards. So I think it was the order of operation that had occurred. And I didn't really think about the broader implications, but I'm definitely cognizant of that now. Well,
and that's I think exactly how the system is supposed to work. That's the reason we have approvers, because you can get anyone to LGTM, but they aren't necessarily the people that have to own that code going forward, right? So this is the system working properly, where they didn't just get their code merged because anybody in the org LGTM did. It came through us, and we're able to then make sure that we actually want it.
Yep. So shame on me first time for letting the higher level flags through, but I'll definitely exercise more jurisprudence, and if I need to, I'll revert this PR. So I'll take ownership for this one.
Thanks.
Yeah, just reading through this as a user, I think that this PR is a good thing. That's just my 2 cents. I agree with your comment at the bottom where you say that these are really a temporary solution to something that is going to be more robust.
It's a UX suck, right? Like at the end of the day, there's a problem in that you need to specify some type of overrides, and we need to allow that. And it's a good idea. It's just a question of where the flags live, right?
Yeah.
My other question
is actually the opposite. Because I think that the way it exists now is a good thing, because passing those, like making those customizations on the command line are not traceable by any means. And I would probably echo what Lucas says here. This is the first time I look at the PR, but echo what Lucas says is that, too many knobs to turn on a command line is also not good.
No, I agree. I think if we feature gate it, it gives you an exit strategy for the user who wants it, and it allows us to not have long-term support for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I was just trying to figure out what was their original use case for these. These are folks working on Docker for desktop, as far as I can tell.
I know they wanted overrides, right? They wanted to supply the overrides.
Yeah, and it feels like this is the first contribution of this particular contributor. So I'd like them to have a good experience, but then yeah, they seem to got overexcited about this small feature that they could add, but unfortunately.
There was another one from the Docker folks too, with regards to adding more knobs to kubeadm to allow for the taints changes, and I blocked that one because I thought it makes very little sense. It's a non-common use case, right?
Mm.
The taints override is an explicit operation done after the fact. I think building it into it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Mm-hmm. It's a one-line change.
Yeah, I could talk to Ian about that. I know him in person. It's IJC who did the other PR. So yeah, I can talk to him about it. I suppose maybe for the taints, because taints aren't even exposed in the config file, right? So the question of the API server flags, etc., is something that they can override through the config file, but taints aren't overridable through the config file. So if we could expose the taints flag in the config file, that might make sense.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me too. I'll have to dig up that PR number.
Yeah, I can comment and copy you. Oh well, you're already on it.
Yeah, I will put that in the notes and go back through that. Let me write that down at least. Okay. So I will take ownership of this one. Next one is SIG update. There was a recent set of PRs that went through, or issues that went through, saying that to please pick up 3.2.14. This one's still pending on a rebase. I don't know if the contributors here in this meeting or not, but if they can update the PR and update it to 3.2.14, that would be awesome. For those who want to know the more details, there should be linked to this main PR some extra issues that actually outline there's a panic that exists in etcd in the version that we merged into master already.
There's a pretty bad etcd bug where it leaks disk space until it runs out of disks, which I think is getting fixed in 3.3. Should we push straight to 3.3?
Typically, we don't skip minor versions because of the compatibility of the data is not supported across minor version bumps. So if we went from 3.1.10, which I think was the last version, to 3.3, we would have an incompatibility across versions. Now we can always get there over time so long as we know what the errata list is and we document and let people know. So what do you have details on what the actual issue is?
I will find the number. I thought they'd fixed the thing about minor updates, minor versions.
The data model hasn't changed from what I know. We can also poke, what's his, JP Betts? He's working at Google, but he is actually helping to do the minor releases for etcd. So if you poke him, he can try to get cherry picks into like a 3.2.15. And that would probably be the best of all worlds, where we'd have the minor version bump and the fix that you're inquiring about. I do know that we absolutely need to get the 3.2 version out in the field because there is a catastrophic failure with gRPC that exists. And that was the issue that had come across from the banking folks in the UK that they had uncovered. They had run into. We'd known about it for a long time, but they had explicitly had a major outage around it. So I want to make sure that we are guiding this in the right direction, and we have all the I's dotted and T's crossed for the version that we want to support. This is kind of minor. This is just people bumping stuff. This next one relates to blocking jobs, and I know I had volunteer thrown Chuck underneath the bus with regards to dealing with test infra. But a question I have, and this would get us into a thorny mix, right? I know Lucas ideally wanted kubeadm installs to run the scale and density tests, which are several thousand node deployments. The problem is you need to watch that like a hawk. And I don't know if we ever really want to be in this boat or not. Do folks have thoughts here?
I think eventually we do. I just don't know how soon. So I agree. I think we need to have pretty good confidence that we are not going to get pinged daily.
My philosophy is when Google switches their defaults to kubeadm based installs, that's when I'm happy to switch this to because that way you have somebody on the Google side who, like Wojtek, who's monitoring this stuff, or the other guys in Poland, would notice and be able to directly make modifications. But until the people who are the primary owners for the output of this are using this tool, I would be remiss. I think it would be a mistake, because we would be out of sync, and it's a lot of noise, and they're difficult problems to debug. So if it's okay with folks, I want to punt this off, and we'll talk about some of the other backlog items tomorrow. Punt this off until Google is going to go all in on kubeadm deployments for GKE.
That sounds fine to me. We have Chris Rousey put the doc together a little while back about things that are blocking us from doing that on GKE. And one of them is dynamic kubelet config, which is slowly inching its way forward. So like other people, we are blocked on dynamic kubelet config, which Toffen is well aware of. So I think hopefully some of our roadblocks will start to fall away.
Right. Sounds good. I know Lee's here. Lee, did you have any updates to your PR? I know it's been pending for a while. We gave a lot of feedback, but
I have not implemented the feedback yet.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm looking to get to that this week.
This is minor. I know Fabrizio was on the call. Oh, did you have something else, Ted?
Just to make sure, it seems like it's pretty much all nitpicks on spelling and then the etcd directory. So I'll get to that when I can. Okay.
Just feel free to poke on the Slack channel when you feel like it's ready. And I know that Jamie's been pretty responsive now again since he's switched, and both him and I and other folks can chime in.
Yeah, thanks for all the reviews. I appreciate it.
I think I'll save this one till the end. We'll talk about this one tomorrow too. The audit logging. This is from our side, but we had also, there's a section inside of the agenda docs too. We don't actually define a space to store audit logs, a location, a sane path, but I think it's pretty important, especially as we go to GA, to be storing the audit logs for kubeadm cluster for diagnostic purposes. I will open an issue on this, and I'll probably point Chuck at it because we need to collect that information too.
Tim, if I'm not wrong, there is already an issue on enabling audit in kubeadm.
Okay, I'll double check that too. And I'll have a list sorted for tomorrow too, to walk through. But I'll add that for tomorrow then. I think the last one that I had for the list that's probably worthy of talking about was some of the UX workflow for your PR, Fabrizio. I don't know if any other people had a chance to look at it, but Jamie and I had looked at it. And this is regards to like how we kind of envisioned a feature gated workflow for a master type of join. And one of the questions I think we had in here, one of the major questions was whether or not we were going to support the file-based configuration at all for a master join.
Please go on.
Yeah, just wondering what's the contention point there?
Because we are going to store the secrets for an HA configuration, the plan was always to store the certs as secrets. And if we had a file-based configuration, it gets weird, right? So I'm not exactly certain. If you look at the logic in here, it becomes apparent for how there's if blocks all around file version or file configuration versus grabbing and getting the secrets and config map information. So if we have the config map on the cluster, why would we use a separate file? And if we have config map and secrets, why would we use a separate file?
Okay, right. So yeah, I guess it seems like, yeah, so it's just the implementation detail of how that's done, really, right? So I mean, the kind of thing that I'm thinking of, it would be great if we could do, but I think actually this is already possible, right? You could do multiple masters if you supply a bunch of files ahead of the time, like the certs and such things. You can already do it that way.
Yeah, and that's part of what Jamie's document that he wrote does, right? It basically has, it's like a swizzling, as Joe likes to call it, of copying certs around. Right?
Yeah, so yeah, and I mean, like, it would be, yeah, I haven't quite looked at Jamie's doc yet, but it seems like it'd be nice if you could generate the certs in one place, which is not one of your Linux boxes, which could be like your laptop or something. You check them into Git or something, and then apply that. Yeah, but then, or like a tarball in S3 or whatever. That the implementation details. But I think that should be already possible. It's just sort of the I guess one of the things is that kubeadm only compiles for Linux, and it would be nice to be able to compile a kubeadm assets utility or whatever for any other platform that would let you do that. But this is a separate use case, I guess. If we just want to join masters, then yeah, that makes sense to use the API. But like, what do we have that file-based configuration for?
I think that's a question for you, Fabrizio.
So basically, the PR now can handle different scenarios. One scenario is that you are using self-hosting and you are keeping certificates into secrets. This is one scenario, and basically in that case, join a secondary master is quite easy. It sum up only in doing the kubelet bootstrap and tainting the node, and then the deploy kicks in and so on. But what I did is that I implemented also the support for other use case where you are not using self-hosting or you are using self-hosting but with cert on the file system. And I did this. In that case, you are required to copy certificate manually. And I did this because the alternative, so self-hosting with cert in secret, is not the default mode to deploy kubeadm. So this is the reason, because for me, we have to keep open also to support also the alternative. But of course, open for discussion.
when I burned through this, I had the following thought, and feel free to poke holes in it or just tell me I'm wrong. I thought that for the ease of use scenario for a high available cluster, I think there's a potential for us to be opinionated and explicitly say that, like, if we're going to have a master join, it will be self-hosted. Otherwise, we have documented workflows that folks can use if they want to do Ansible-based swizzling or whatever. Pick your configuration management tooling of du jour, and you can copy your certs around. It just simplifies the code, and it simplifies the use cases. And I think I'd like to hear feedback when other people think about that thought.
Here I have a feedback. I went through the Jimmy document for HA and also tested the approach before implementing the PR. And what happened is that the fact that kubeadm manages some config maps and also create tokens and so on. If you do like in the Jimmy tutorial, and you execute kubeadm init many times, you have some side effect. For instance, you are creating many tokens. Second, you are overriding some config maps, and the risk is that at the end, the workers node will join only the last master, not the real cluster. So, in doing the manual step, there is always the risk that you make error. What you can do with this version of kubeadm join master is that you make simpler and less risky the manual setup or the setup without the secrets, the certificate in secret. So it depends. We can go on and say, okay, let's do the manual, let's follow the tutorial, but at the end we have to be ready to support people that makes error during the tutorial, because there is a bunch of steps. If you have time, there is also an issue in the kubeadm report where different people tried to create a different solution based on Ansible or different automation tool for doing HA with kubeadm, and there is a lot of discussion and also some weird solution, for instance, for Amazon AWS, where you cannot use the an IP address for the advertised address, and people created many workarounds. So, in my opinion, we can simplify the story, and this is a value.
I think that's probably a fair topic for broader conversation. I think we have several HA documents, but I think a distillation of, a finalized version of this specific set of user stories in a simple, like, KEP style format would probably be really helpful for other readers too, so who are not familiar with it, because I've been in this mix for a long time, so I know the different flags, but my view is also tainted. So if other people have opinions on how they want to see this work, it's probably better to have those opinions vetted on a focused, simple KEP for just this command line workflow. You know what I'm saying?
That makes sense.
And focus on the two user story scenarios. One is self-hosted and the other is configuration file based, and why you would choose A versus B. Because for me, I'd always choose A. So that my opinion's tainted. Does that seem reasonable to you, Fabrizio?
Yes, it seems reasonable. It is more or less a a more formal version of the design document that we wrote last cycle.
Yep, that's exactly what I was thinking. And we can force eyeballs to look at it too. Then, if it's a cap.
Okay, but what I didn't get. So you want that in this cap we compare the two options.
We'll outline the two user stories. You don't need to compare them. As long as they're outlined, people can argue whether or not the merits of A versus B and whether or not you need A versus B. I have opinions, but that's my opinion only, right? And I recognize that I'll have biases there.
Oh, okay. I will ping you for the template of the cap where I look for in the feature report. Is it, if I'm right?
It's in the community repo.
Okay, I will try to write down these and then I come back to you.
Okay. That's all I have for the.
Just to be clear, I totally agree that in the long term, the self-hosting solution is the solution that we have to sponsorship, in my opinion. To sponsor, in my opinion. The question is how we manage in the meantime that checkpointing is not there and checkpointing for secret is not there.
Well, for HA, it doesn't matter, right? That was always the contention. We don't need checkpointing at all for HA. So long as we have a rally point on restart, it won't.
If I'm wrong, you need the checkpointing for secret for the case that you lost the data center, the whole cluster.
Well, yeah. If you lose the whole cluster, then you do need it. That's the one user story that's not kosher for this configuration. But we might even recommend folks. We could have that as like part of an errata, and we could recommend folks if you want, disaster recovery support across a given failure domain to spread your masters across that failure domain, which varies based upon provider and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, Tim, I feel like I'm leaning towards what Fabrizio is saying here because I think you have sort of conflicting advice. One is you should keep your clusters inside of a failure domain and have locality and have sort of different clusters in different failure domains. And what you're saying is sort of the opposite of like you should take your cluster control plane and spread it out across failure domains.
Well, I'm saying that like you have to pick your poison, and whatever you have to weigh your options of what matters most to you. If you care about resiliency and DC recovery for a single cluster, then you might want to have this as a constraint. But it's all about constraint management, because if we get to the point where we want to force checkpointing secrets, then we have to just drive that home as a resolution then for this state space. But I was kind of trying to purposely avoid that in favor for some of the other conversations we've had with regards to the possibility of using daemon sets for upgrades as a clean solution that gets us out of the conundrum of trying to manage all the checkpointing in the kubelet.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure that depending on who you're talking to, if you're going to be able to convince them that there is any failure domain they can spread across where they wouldn't be able to turn all their machines off at the same time and come back. Right? I think for some people that's going to be a hard requirement, and maybe something like Arc is sufficient to solve that. But you need to be able to sort of restart your cluster if you turn everything off.
Yes, and Arc is one possible solution that we propose, and there's other things for data center style failure that you could use. You could have a rectification controller that basically blasts out with cluster API, whatever tooling du jour you have. So all of your state for clusters is always a GitOps type of thing, which is what a lot of people do.
Yeah, I would just like to also bring up the idea that perhaps clusters don't always need to be on, right? And it can be a useful use case to be able to actually just turn some compute off and then have the cluster back on and turn back those nodes. So that is probably something that also fits in my domain. It's not exactly failure, it's like intentional, not even downtime, just a decommission. Might be temporary.
And if you store your etcd volumes on EBS, that you can do that. You can turn off everything and turn it back on, and everything just comes back.
Yeah, we're talking about bootstrapping the self-hosted control plane, though, which is where the secret checkpointing comes in. So that would be a necessity as well for not only failure recovery, but just supporting the ability to turn stuff on and off. But yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Justin.
Those are all the major issues I had. I think if there's comments once the KEP is up, I think vetting them there would probably be a really good idea for other folks to chime in. We'd probably want to let that percolate to get more feedback and probably spread the gospel where possible. Outside of that, I sent links to folks on the Cluster Lifecycle channel with regards to helping curate the upstream backlog. I went through PRs and I started going through kubeadm repo, but some people had volunteered. I don't know if they had any chance to walk through any of that stuff at all or not.
No, I've not walked through any of the PRs that you might have pointed out, but the one thing I did this week is cleared out my inbox from all the stale Kubernetes PR and issue threads, so I should be able to get back on track with the new stuff, right? Because I had like too much stuff in my inbox, so it was untrackable. So I should be able to start reviewing new PRs shortly. And Tim, I'm not sure where should I look for the things you just mentioned? Is that stuff? Did you ping people on PRs or issues, or
I sent a link to a set of queries, and I think you were on that list too. Hold on, I have to go last week sometime.
It's I'm looking in my email. Yeah.
Oh no, it was in Slack. Here is the open. I will put the list in the doc right now.
Okay, thank you. I'll start
There's
looking at that first of all then.
So that's the issue backlog, and this is not definitive. This is the query that Lucas typically used for managing the issue backlog of things that went through the main repository. I had already gone through Lucas's backlog of PRs as well as the PR list that specified kubeadm, and I've dealt with most of those, but what I'd like to do tomorrow is go through the actual kubeadm repo with a smaller group and get a priority sorted list of what we wish to accomplish in 110 and try to make that resemble reality. That's my goal for tomorrow. So I hope to come to that armed with some of the distillations I have so far.
Great. Thank you, Tim, for walking through those pull requests. And I will thank you in advance for tomorrow's meeting as well. Looking forward to trying to sort the open issues. The other follow-up from last week is the sending out a survey for kubeadm GA, so we can get some feedback from users and the community and people outside of our SIG in terms of what they think should be blocking GA, so we can maybe not take that as gospel, but take it into account as we decide what we think GA is. We still don't have a volunteer to drive that. I don't know if you've seen, people who haven't seen it, the next agenda item is that Phil Wittrock announced at the community meeting last Thursday and sent out an email also with a survey about SIGs and how SIGs are operating. This is from the steering committee as they're trying to figure out the SIG structure and SIG governance. And based on looking at that survey, it probably would not take someone very long to create a Google survey and send it out for kubeadm GA. So if someone's looking for something that's sort of relatively small amount of time that would have pretty good impact on our group, this would be something great to jump on. And as I mentioned, please follow the link here if you haven't done so already. As Billy and I were talking with Lucas about this, and I think the intent is for everybody to take the survey, not just one person per SIG or sort of representative people from the SIG. But we'd like to get as many people giving feedback as possible, because if we only hear from people maybe who are leading SIGs, then the feedback is going to be very skewed versus sort of the wider audience of people that I think they're trying to get from the survey. And the steering committee, I think, is interested in making sure that SIGs are working well for everybody. So please follow the link. It should take 5 minutes or less to go through and answer those questions. So next, Dan Cohen from CNCF sent out an email a couple of days ago about SIG sessions for KubeCon EU in Copenhagen. And so if you guys recall, what we did for the North American KubeCon in Austin was that we did an intro for our SIG, and Lucas and I gave like a 35-minute talk to an overflowing room. We did not sign up for a deep dive, which I think was probably a mistake. And so I'm kind of curious if anyone has comments or suggestions about whether we should do both, whether we should do just a deep dive this time, or whether we should stick with just doing an intro. If you guys haven't read Dan's email, the point of this is basically KubeCon is a great place to find new people to join SIGs. Your SIG intro should be basically an introduction to your SIG, maybe a quick demo, just to sort of talk about what happens and what people are working on in the SIG to try and attract people to help join you, but also to sort of inform people about your SIG as they're trying to sort of navigate the complexities of the Kubernetes community and the Kubernetes project. If they at least understand which SIG to go talk to, that's definitely a big help also. The deep dive is designed to be much more of sort of a hands-on, engineering or design discussion session. It's not meant to be a presentation. They do give you a room for a deep dive and record it, which is different than the intro. And I think that's strange. It feels to me like it's backwards. Like it doesn't seem as worthwhile to me to record somebody drawing on a whiteboard and doing a design discussion as it does for, here's what our SIG does, please come join us. That seems like it'd actually be more valuable to record. So I'm going to see if I can maybe give Dan some feedback and try to switch those around, or at least also record the intros. Like I said, I think we were maybe remiss not to do a deep dive last time, given sort of the amount of interest and the things that we were presenting in other sessions. And I'm curious if people have comments about what they want to do. Dan also mentioned that they're giving away sort of speaker tickets for up to 2 people to lead these at KubeCon. And so I also wanted to throw it out there, since Lucas and I did it last time. I'm happy to sign up to do it again. If somebody else wants to step up and lead these, I'm happy to do it with someone or let someone else take the lead here.
I'm happy to help. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say the same. Happy to help.
Yeah, I'm happy to help, but I need to talk with our folks first to see what our strategy is for attending KubeCon EU. So I think it's predicated on that.
I can also help as well, and I'll sync with you, Tim, offline on that. As for the feedback with regard to the recording, I totally agree. I had the same thoughts, and I know Dan is actively soliciting feedback on that kind of stuff now, so we should reach out to him.
How do you think we should do it with regards to like the various projects? Because I mean, the goal being obviously to get contributors. So we want kubeadm to have a talk, right? And we want cops to have a talk, and we want kubeadm to have a talk, and all the tools, right? So how should we split that, or if you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think some of those things we try to submit separate talks for. Like in Austin, Lucas gave a talk about kubeadm, which was more of a deep dive on that topic, and we were trying to keep the sort of the SIG overview to be more high level. Like I basically presented what you'd set out as our charter for our SIG and said, here are the big things that our SIG works on, and here's what we're doing. And then Lucas did a little bit of talk about kubeadm as sort of one of the projects that's trying to accomplish those goals. And I think that's kind of where we want to keep the overview, as not like the overview is about kubeadm, right? The overview is about our SIG and what our SIG does as a whole. And kubeadm is one of the sub-projects. And if you want to know more about that, go see the talk. And if there's not a kubeadm talk at KubeCon EU, go watch Lucas's recording from Austin, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you did a great job on that at wherever that was, Austin. But I'm just thinking about like for this particular thing that Dan sent out, like how that should, whether we want to keep it the same, or I don't know. We can talk about it in the channel, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd be inclined to keep it the same because we're basically trying to do the same thing with probably a different audience, right? I think the people coming to KubeCon EU that aren't, the people that are always at the KubeCons are going to be a different set of folks, right? It's going to be people probably from Europe that are able to travel sort of more locally, and we might be able to sort of pull more of those people in to help our SIG. So I definitely think that the intro should not, I mean, it shouldn't be exactly the same, but it should have sort of the same focus of assume your audience knows nothing about what we do, try to give like, here's what our mission is, here's what we're trying to work on. And maybe sort of add some demo to that, because we definitely didn't do a demo last time, although if they only give us 30 minutes, then there's maybe not a lot of time for a demo anyway. We didn't do a deep dive last time, and so we don't really have a structure on there that we know whether or not it worked well. But I do feel like a deep dive in some ways would replicate what we've done at previous gatherings, where we were able to sit down and like actually try to design things and work through some problems, where we have a room set aside and people can come join us in that or sort of observe if they aren't part of the SIG. And I think that would have been really valuable at KubeCon Austin if we'd had that room set aside in a time where people would all show up.
Yeah, we kind of tried to do that with the taco bar.
Yes, right. I think that was.
Didn't we take notes on this, like right after KubeCon?
We might have. I'll go back and look at the meeting notes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it sounds like people are leaning towards we should do both. Yay? Nay? Okay.
I would agree. The other thing that was really helpful in Berlin was the actual full day breakout. I don't know how feasible that is, but I know there was talk about it last time. We didn't have a room and whatnot, and it just kind of fell by the wayside, but that might be pretty helpful. Like, as much as I like going to taco bars and stuff like that, I think sitting down might be helpful.
With a whiteboard room, right? Like if we had food in a whiteboard room, I think I would absolutely make the case for a whole day type of thing, or at least half day type of thing, because we'd actually be able to make good traction. I think the problem with a lot of these conferences is you get this small unit of time and you can only accomplish so much just getting people up to speed. But if we had a core group of folks that really wanted to say, like, we want to tackle A, B, and C, much like what was done in Berlin, I think that would be more beneficial use of time.
Yeah,
so that sounds like an alternate proposal to a deep dive session in some ways additive. So a deep dive is effectively that, but it's only an hour and a half. It's not a half day or a full day, right?
I was just thinking that as well, right after I said that. Does it make sense to maybe like kind of make it public that we're meeting at this time and like reserve the first hour or whatever as a deep dive for people who may be new, and then extend into like, discussions about things that are currently happening?
That'd be nice. I just think that the only problem is that one thing we'll need to solve is who's going to host us, right? So in Berlin, it was hosted at WeWork's office. Yeah, so we need to find a sponsor/host in Copenhagen.
Yeah, and I think that's one advantage of the deep dives is A, that it's during the conference, so people that aren't necessarily going to be in Copenhagen for extra days on either end can be there for the deep dive. And B, they'll give us a room, right? They'll give us a room and a whiteboard as part of the deal. So it sounds like, I guess I'll respond to Dan and tell him that we want to do both sessions. The people are still a little bit TBD because it sounds like we have multiple volunteers, but they'll give us 2 tickets. So we need to work that out. We can try to do that in Slack. I'll send them some feedback about the recordings situation. And if other people want to chime in on that, that would be great. And then also, I think that even if we have a deep dive, we should probably try to figure out if we can organize sort of another locale or a longer chunk of time as well for the people that can be there.
This deep dive during the conference, what is another problem is what it might overlap with our sessions or our 6 meetings. And many people are going to multiple.
Yes, exactly right. And that's another good point. Like the deep dives are during the conference, which is both good and bad. It's good because people are there during the conference, so you don't have to be there extra. But it's bad because it might be overlapping with other things that are going on. Okay, finally, the last agenda item, we have a minute left, is I submitted our first KEP, which created a SIG cluster lifecycle directory in the community repo with an owner's file that's set to be the SIG leads. The KEP is for the cluster API. I basically took the document that was a Google Doc that Jacob had written up, recast it as a KEP, sent it off, and had Joe review that. It still needs some work. Like it's definitely a sort of a rough first draft, but it does sort of create a place where we can stick other KEPs. And I know that we went through and created a couple of them in Google Doc form that need to be translated into Markdown. And Tim mentioned earlier a KEP for kubeadm. We should definitely start trying to put more KEPs into place. So there's a template for KEPs in general, and there's also one for SIG cluster lifecycle if people want to take a look.
I'll try to move my old one too. I'll make a PR to move my old one and update it over there.
Awesome, thanks. All right, and with that, we are both out of agenda items and out of time. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm looking forward to Tim's backlog prioritization tomorrow. And if people aren't going to be there, we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you. Bye.